Hi,
Hi,
everybody, and
everybody, and
welcome to
welcome to
Friday Night
Friday Night
Flock
Talk
Talk.
Talk.
I am Robin Sullivan from the Leather Elves, and I'm excited to be here tonight. I've got some reminders. Those of you that tune in all the time know we do the little reminders, get them out of the way, and then we move on. So if you want to listen to Flock Talk, Friday Night Flock Talk, you can like the Leather Elves on Facebook to get notifications. You can check the Leather Elves Facebook page for surprise sales and pop-up events. We're having that sale in the corner right now. It was a Valentine's sale, but we love you guys so much that we decided to extend it to Sunday. 40% off. You enter code HEART at checkout. You can also follow the Leather Elves on Instagram, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. So a lot of different ways to tune in and get notification. And I see that there's a lot of folks tuning in tonight. I'm really excited with the person that I have as a guest. I We were talking before we came on tonight about where we met. So I'll kind of try to fill that in as we go. But it is my pleasure to introduce you guys to my guest tonight, Lara Joseph. So, hey, Lara, how's it going?
Good, Robin. Didn't I just see you?
A few minutes ago, and last
No, I
week,
mean a few
and the
weeks
week
ago.
before that, right? And with the magic of technology and Nick, here we are again. So, but I want to, before we get started, Lara, I want to just read your bio for people who don't know you, which I'm sure are few and far between. Lara is the owner of the Animal Behavior Center. It's an international educational center empowering the lives of animals and the people that care for them using applied behavior analysis and positive reinforcement. She's a professional animal behavior consultant and trainer with a focus on all animals exotic. Lara travels internationally, giving workshops, lectures, and provides online live streaming learning programs on behavior, training, and enrichment. Lara's focus is on behavior and training with all species of animals, whether in the home, in a shelter, zoo, or educational ambassadors. She sits on the advisory board for All Species Consulting, the Indonesian Parrot Project, and Nature's Nursery, a wildlife rehabilitation center in Ohio. She is the president of a nonprofit, Sam I Can Foundation, raising awareness for animals and animal organizations in need. She's a professional member of IAATE and ZAA, and she has been asked to co author and is currently working on an international manual of animal behavior and training. So, there's a lot to say. It's funny, as I read your bio, there are a lot of parallels, and I was saying before we came on, you guys, we were trying to figure out where we met, and we can't remember because we just can't. It's not an age thing or anything. It's just we can't. But I know the first time we presented together was on the very first Parrot Lovers cruise, which I don't know. We had a good time.
Oh yeah, we did. we we had a blast and
It
came home with a lot of memories.
Yeah, we did. It was good. It was really great. And I know the Parrot Lovers Cruise is either going on right now or it was last week. So it's still going on, which is a good thing. It talks a lot about how much people care for parrots, and if you can add fun to it, then that's a bonus. So
Yeah.
um, so when we were talking about what we were going to talk about, um, I came up with an outline, and the first thing I put on it was a short discussion of animal welfare. I don't know that there's such a thing. I was kind of looking at that and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. But so I think, it's become so welfare, I think, has always been our focus. Those of us that do this and work with animals, it's always been a focus. It's coming into the limelight now, I think. What do you think? I mean, it's almost like it's the trendy word.
Yeah. I think you're right. Um, I think I'm familiar with a lot of the work you do. We're both have the same goals for what we do, the best interest of the animal,
Mhm.
and animal welfare. I mean, that's what we've been doing all this time, you know?
Yeah, it's amazing to me when people get all excited. They're like, "Oh, animal welfare. It's that's, that's great that we're gonna do that now." We've been doing it all along, and I think anyone who's interested in working with their animals and in making life better for either their companion animals or the animals that they work with in facilities, you're working on welfare, and I
Yeah.
think that's just something that kinda goes hand in hand. And the other thing about animal welfare, for me anyway, I think so the definition of welfare is you can look it up, you can, Google it, but it varies from setting to setting and animal to animal. I mean, would you agree as far as that's concerned?
Yeah. Yeah. Focused on the individual, with the species in mind. Um, you know, I just had somebody ask me, can you define animal welfare and give a talk about it? And encompasses a lot of things: the veterinary care, the nutritional care, the how they're getting their nutrition, the foraging, the training, um, all of that.
Yeah, I know, you've worked with Dr. Jason Crean as well as I have, and Jason and I were talking the other day about welfare and how it's kind of a return. The focus that's happening now on animal welfare is kind of a focus and the return um, to the holistic approach. When you talk about welfare, it's not just one piece. There's so much that goes into it. Um, and so when you're looking at like the animals that you're working with, when you're looking at welfare, if I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, I'm sorry. How do you
No, it's
assess
okay.
welfare? I mean, if you're going to say,
Um,
okay, how do you do that?
well, I'll look at, the species as a whole and what the species does, but I'll focus on the individual, what it is doing, what it isn't doing, what is it eating, if there are any type of abnormal repetitive behaviors or any behaviors that look, what does this behavior mean? Is this stress? Is this pain? Um, is this hunger? You know,
Mm,
I try to evaluate to make sure the animal's getting everything it needs, and then I go try to go beyond that and say, okay, this is baseline. How can we get it better?
yeah. And I think, there's a woman who's listening tonight, I believe. Um, Her name's Melissa Davis, and Melissa is a great trainer. And she's a companion parrot owner. And one of the things that I love about how Melissa trains, and you mentioned it, is listening to that animal, listening, observing and listening. And she has said to me, well, I don't know the terminology and I don't but when you watch her train, there's such a great relationship that happens. And I think that's one of the things that it's kind of a gift when you're working with animals, when you're doing training, when you're doing enrichment plans and working on enrichment. I think that relationship and that give and take is what makes people good trainers, is what makes them and some people exceptional trainers. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the comments here. Becky Stockschlager is on, and I don't know if you know Becky, Lara. Becky
I
used to be in Florida.
I know people
She
when I see their faces. I'm horrible with
Okay.
names.
Well, Becky's on, and her granddaughter, Noki, has told her that she wants to be a behaviorist. She reached out on one of the posts, and told her to let me know that she was here. And so we're going to talk some more, obviously, about training as enrichment. But I just wanted to say, and I'd like to get your input too, for Noki. This is the fact that you're listening tonight and that you're getting more information is the way to go. And I know for me, it's been an ongoing learning journey, and you learn from doing, you learn from listening to people, you learn from conversations at conferences, things like that. But that's the one thing I would say. If that's the direction you want to go and you want to work with animals, then just be like a sponge and get that information. I mean, what can you give her any, advice, Laura?
Sure. I commend her for being this interested at her age because your whole life is in front of you. Um, never, yeah, like what you said, Robin, be a sponge. And this can take you down a million different roads. Follow your
Mhm.
passion. You're going to figure that out as the more you interact. New opportunities will come up, and you'll be like, oh, that's interesting. I never thought about this. Pursue it. Volunteer if you can to get more hands on experience. Um, and S once you get a I don't wanna say once you get so much information, start applying it, and you'll see how it works. If you like I did, I love to write. I started writing about it, and I didn't think it would lead me here. But I'm here,
I was just gonna
you know?
say, I remember when we were on the Parrot Lovers cruise, and I remember you saying to me, "Well, I'm never gonna do this for a living. This is
Oh, did I
never gonna
say
be
that?
all I" You did, and I was like, it's never gonna be all that I do." And it takes you by surprise, and it kinda grabs hold of your soul, for lack of a better term. And, it definitely doesn't. Becky says she's been working with birds since she came to the shop at 2 weeks old. She was 6 when they left, and she learned a lot, and I mean, I've seen videos, I've seen pictures, Becky, of Noki with your animals, and it's clear. I mean, and sometimes it just clicks, and Laura, I think you can probably attest to that. There's that moment, and I won't call it an aha moment. It's just kind of you ease into it, and you know that this is where you belong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um I mean, once I started understanding applied behavior analysis and really focusing on it, working with it with numerous different species, I became really enthralled in it. And I always tell people once you understand behavior, it can be a godsend and a curse
Mhm.
because you understand how it works, you know how to apply it, and you may not understand the individual in front of you, but you will, and they'll start understanding you. But it's a curse as well because you see it going wrong all around you in the you know what I mean? How humans use it with each other. If they
Oh, yeah.
only knew, yeah, you're creating so much frustration in your life because you're reinforcing all kinds of undesired behaviors, but you don't understand it.
It's true, and I remember talking to another, member of the IAATE board when we were on the board together years ago, and that person said to me, professional trainers can be the most punishing, that we and it's true because we do know that science, and we really try to make it work, but it happens, and you're right, because the scary part is sometimes things happen or you participate in something, and then you go, "Oh, no. I didn't want that. I didn't wanna reinforce that behavior. I didn't wanna make that happen ag or, get that to happen again. I didn't wanna increase that frequency." And you kind of start looking at things with completely different eyes. Whereas before you'd be like, "Oh, well, that just happens. Oh, well, that's just because." And it's really never just because. And so you gotta kind of get to that point. But Noki, it's a great profession. It's a great lifestyle. Yeah. And Nancy Forrester says 30-year learning journey. She's here because she's a learning junkie. And I think Nancy, that's part of like the passion for animals and the passion for working with animals. You do become that kind of learning junkie, and you just want because you want to, okay, so we started out talking about welfare, and you want to enhance that welfare. And so you need to learn more. Um, I
Yeah,
don't know.
and something you said earlier too, Robin. I apologize if my dogs are barking. I live with two deaf dogs and one's deaf and blind, but I've trained the one that can see to bark
Mhm,
when the front porch light goes off. So, um, you mentioned before about going to conferences. Even if you don't think I mean, just go to conferences
mhm.
because you will listen to other speakers, and you do a lot of networking, and it can even cause you to have ideas that
Mhm.
you forgot about, or
Yeah,
you're like, "Oh, yeah, I know. Okay. All right. I can't wait to get home to start applying this."
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's that, everybody's like, "Oh, well, I've heard so and so speak before," or I've heard enough about that topic, and there's always something new. And I'll say to people, I learn something every single time I go to a conference. Oh, come on, you know all that stuff already. No, you're right, it's those things that you forgot, or those things that you used to do, and for some reason you got away from it, not because it was a bad thing, but you just kind of moved on to something different. And then it's like, oh, I used to do that, that's a great idea. And yeah, I think it's really important, to participate as much as you can in the community. And I don't know if you're finding, like, around here, bird clubs are not really a thing anymore. It's
Yeah,
just
here
not.
either.
Yeah, and it's just so hard, because there's nowhere for people to share that information, and to kind of, so take everything online with a grain of salt, is my opinion. But still, like, get that information where you can, and just make sure it's reputable information. So, all
Yeah.
right, so
Yeah.
we've
For
done philosophy 101 now. So when we were talking about this live stream, we talked about training as enrichment. And then I went, okay, should I call it training as enrichment, training for enrichment, training enrichment? And it goes so all those different ways. So let's talk first about training as enrichment. Um, do you see training as enrichment in and of itself?
Absolutely. It's why I'm doing what I'm doing,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
entered this field through enrichment, well, a
Mhm.
portion of enrichment, um, eh, making toys and things for birds to engage with, and how I could make their enclosure better. And so that was my primary goal. And then I entered the field of training because um, I started understanding applied behavior analysis, just to try to get some undesired behaviors or stressful behaviors to cease. But then I found that relationship that it builds. Sorry, am I going ahead
No,
of
no,
where
you're
we're
absolutely right. No, that's exactly where we are. And I think so I think enrichment is a gateway drug to training. I think I think we all kinda a lot of us started out with enrichment. I wanna enhance the quality of life for animals. And then when we got into it, we needed to know the why, and the how, why is that happening? Or how do we, like you said, get rid of a behavior or lessen a behavior that we're not thrilled with? And through that relationship happens. And I think, you have a picture that you sent us. Which picture was it with the building, training, enhancing a relationship?
relationships?
Yes.
I think it's with the wolves,
Okay.
with the
Nick, do we
wolves.
have that?
So, and the reason, like, a lot of people on here might think, why are we talking about wolves? And my point was to say that, and as you well know, Robin, this works across the board with species. I could have very easily called my business the Avian Behavior Center, which I was going to. And then I thought, why limit it to just birds? Let's do animals.
Yeah. It's so true, and
So,
I think so. Now your relationship with these guys, tell us about that.
so this is Jenks and Naomi. Um, they are wolves that I've known for a couple of years. My interaction with them recently has just skyrocketed, for a couple different reasons, but I went back out and started working with them. And what I'm doing in this um, picture was just the beginning stages of training. And I've got latex gloves on because I've got meat, I believe, in my hands. But what these wolves ended up showing, these are hand reared wolves. So what they ended up showing was their reinforcer was not what I thought it was. It wasn't the meat in the hands, it was the interaction. The
Yeah.
training was the engagement was the reinforcer, which I
Mhm.
just took the meat, ducked it aside, and I was like, "All right, we're gonna reanalyze this situation." And that's what I'm getting them to do is up on cue, um, for engagement.
Mhm, and I think that it's so important, and we get sometimes people will get caught up in the science end of things. It's the, "I've gotta do it exactly right, I've gotta do it, according to this specific I've gotta find a reinforcer, and it's got" and we get stuck on, food reinforcers, and that's not always what it's all about. It's a and, I mentioned Melissa really listens to her bird, and it's one of those things where sometimes it's just that the act of training, the act of interacting, that is reinforcing in and of itself. And I think, people we get to that point where sometimes you get caught up in, I need to find a reinforcer, and you think it needs to be a tangible thing, and it doesn't always have to be. I mean, I'm sure you've had a lot of experiences where I know I have, where that reinforcement kind of pops out of nowhere and you have to pay attention and use that, for to have a positive outcome.
Yeah, and I've got a couple things I wanna say, and my mind races, so I'll probably only remember one. Um, but first is, like, for example, for those that are learning, if you're working with an animal and it turns and looks away from you and you thought you had its full attention, don't get frustrated. Why is it looking over there? Because there is the reinforcer behind the animal looking there. Look at what they're looking at, observe, identify, note this may be a potential reinforcer I can use in the future.
Mhm,
The second thing I was going to say was attention, as you were talking about food, um, as is not always a reinforcer. I mean, when we're
mhm,
working, I would say if I have to guess an average, we're using food as a reinforcer about 45% of the time, 40% of the time. So, what are the other reinforcers we're using? With Rico, my umbrella cockatoo, you will hear me bridge with the word good. I may deliver a food reinforcer. I'm going like this because I do a lot of banana baby food in the syringe. But then
mhm.
you'll hear me also after the bridge deliver the food reinforcer. I'll pull the food reinforcer away. And depending on the situation, I may say, Rico, that was so awesome. That attention is a reinforcer added onto the banana baby food.
Yeah, and Michelle, says that her bear-eyed, will do things for her happy reaction, and, it's definitely something, there's no cost in that. It's about building that relationship. Michelle has an amazing relationship with Shadow, and, it's that's, I'm sure, part of it is she recognized that fact. Um, and Amber says that, Phoenix was on her harness and she kept looking up and she saw an eagle. And so I think that goes back to, again, observing them and being aware of what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, because it's very different in a lot of cases from what we experience, and I did a paper last year on anthropomorphizing and how I don't know about you, but I see that eagle flying by and I'm kind of excited. I kind of don't think that about that. And it's a matter of not putting our own stuff on the animals and really observing and really being aware of, is the bird looking this way because it's something that they need to watch, that they need to keep an eye on? Is it because there's a sparkly over here and it's exciting? What is it that's driving that behavior? What was the antecedent to the bird turning their head to look that way? And I think it's funny when you were talking about having working with an animal, and the animal doesn't necessarily have it. You don't have all of its focus when you're working. And I remember going to a zoo, and they were working with an eagle doing a flight from a point A to point B, and the trainer was at one end and the eagle was at the other. And the trainer was getting really frustrated because they were cueing the behavior, they were requesting that behavior, and the eagle just wasn't doing it. And I realized that the eagle wasn't looking at the trainer. The trainer didn't have that bird's attention, because it
Mm,
was, like you say, it was looking at other things, and that being out and about was actually more reinforcing than the mouse that they were gonna get at the other end. So, yeah,
yeah.
it's about looking at the whole picture, I think, too, when you're
Yeah, I
doing
was
that
just
training.
getting ready to go down that road
We'll go there
because I was
then.
okay, I was gonna say body language is behavior. Behavior is, um, contextual, and when you you know this animal through understanding its behavior, you understand its behavior through training, because training is about the 2 of you, not just you doing the training. When you better understand your animal's behavior, you'll be able to predict and be wrong sometimes what's getting ready to happen. um, you'll better be able to know when something may be wrong with that animal because the animal usually does this or behaves in this way, or the wings or the whatever animal you're working with, the ears are usually placed in this way and they're not placed in that way, and in the future they still are not placed in that way, so something may be wrong here. um as far as health, something else, something scaring it.
Yeah. And, I think so getting back to training as enrichment in and of itself, I think that the big takeaway for me on that is the relationship building that happens. And by relationship, I'm not talking about like, oh, I love you and you're my favorite trainer, you're my favorite animal. That's not the kind of relationship talking about. I'm talking about um, being able to read that body language, being able to have a conversation
Yeah,
about needs, desires, wants, whatever, and being able to fulfill that because you've done training, because you've built that relationship, and therefore it's in and of itself enriching.
yeah, yeah, and you understand that animal. Yeah, yep, yep, so
Michelle says respecting each other, question mark, and absolutely. I mean, it's the same respect, in my opinion, when you're doing a training session, you're working on training, it's the same respect that you offer someone that you're having a conversation with, because like you said, Lara, it's it's both of you. It's the 2 of you in that training, situation, and it's not it definitely, is built on respect. Um,
absolutely.
so
And a lot of times I'll tell people, like, whenever I get ready to train an animal or do a training um, demonstration for people that are watching me, I will say something to them before. I always tell them, training is communication. I am communicating with this animal. The animal is communicating with me. If I don't turn and talk to you when you ask me a question, it's because I'm having this conversation with this animal. And you can kind of look at it as an interruption of a conversation. And I always say, I will address your questions. Just let me do a training session. And when I step aside, it lets that animal know to, you don't have to sit here and keep focusing on me and me ignoring you because I'm
Mhm.
turning and talking to somebody else.
I think about it at like, being at a cocktail party, and if you're having a one-on-one discussion with someone and someone else comes up, you know they're there, you can see them out of your peripheral vision, but you're probably not going to break off the conversation with that person that you're having the one-on-one with until it's finished, and then your body language, if you turn to the other person, you've now acknowledged, okay, you can still stay here and we're going to talk and whatever, but I'm going to turn my attention here instead. And I think just as we read our animals' body language, they read ours as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um,
Absolutely. I mean,
so it,
walking with a room full of parrots that know you, they're going to know when you're upset. They're going to
oh yeah.
know when you're stressed.
Mhm,
I mean, I see that when I walk in and something has upset me or in whatever way, the parrots will start getting more over aroused, start screaming, and they're
mhm.
just doing it based on reading my behavior.
Right. Right. And that's another thing when we talk about training. I think one of the important things to remember is you are being read as you're having this conversation, just as you would with anyone that you're having a conversation with, and that you want to kind of be as calm as you can be. I mean, there's those moments like Michelle was saying her happy face, and you were saying, Rico, that was such a great job. And there are those times when that is appropriate, but you kind of want to keep things a little bit calm, when you're going into that situation. I have found that anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So
Like I know, I mean, I was training Rico right before I came home for this, and he was jumping across the countertop, and I had a empty roll of paper towels, the core, and I know
mhm,
that if I go boom, boom, boom on the countertop, it's gonna overstimulate him, and he's gonna start jumping. That may be funny. I know what comes next. If he keeps jumping, overstimulation can quickly turn into a bite.
yeah. Oh,
So I did
absolutely.
it, and then I was like, "I'm not gonna do that again."
Well, and I think, we we've kind of digressed from training as enrichment, but I think these are really important points, and that one's a really important one, that overstimulation can go down that wrong path very quickly, and I guarantee you that, I would put money on it that you've heard, "I wasn't doing anything, he was so happy before he bit me." I mean,
Right.
I wish I had like a dime for every time I heard that because I would be wealthy, but, um, it's it's a matter of reading that situation, and if you know that's where it's gonna go, and you can choose to go down that road if you want to, but don't be surprised when it takes that not so positive turn.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Identify why it happened. But
Yeah.
that's communication with the animal, and it builds a relationship, and that is enrichment.
Mhm. It is, and and that's a interesting point, and enrichment is not always positive. I mean, there are things that sometimes stress can be enriching, in small doses. Sometimes, things that are new can be enriching even though they're not always accepted right away. Um, and I think we need to kind of consider, yeah, the interaction alone can definitely be, that enrichment, and it's reinforcing. Adrian, you're absolutely right. But sometimes what we consider enrichment, it's a little bit more controlled than what I think. This is again my opinion, but sometimes what we term as enrichment is a little bit more controlled than what an animal might how far an animal might take it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
it does.
Yeah. And, yeah, Steve says too many people believe that any amount of stress is a bad thing, and that isn't true. We don't wanna overstress them by any stretch of the imagination, but stress does build coping skills. There
Yeah.
are definitely studies that show that. Um,
Yeah, and that's why, talking about control, Robin, that's why I love aviaries for birds,
mhm,
because you know that when you start training an animal using positive reinforcement, it builds that relationship and they don't want you to leave if it goes to that point. So you
mhm,
need ways to redirect that behavior to make them okay with balance and new people and new environments. And that's why I love aviaries, because that is enrichment that you have no control of. The sun,
mhm.
the wind, the rain,
Yeah.
the hawk flying above,
Mhm.
the car horn in the distance. That's all added enrichment.
Yeah, oh, definitely, and I had a slide in my presentation years ago that said, sometimes enrichment just happens, because it does, and that's another piece where training comes in, and I think, sometimes birds need the training to figure out what enrichment is, so that, it's not always immediately obvious to birds, to any animal. We decide, "Oh, this is enriching. This is great. I'm gonna give them this enrichment. I've looked up the definition of enrichment, and I need to do that." But some birds don't get it, and I know that you've had experience with this too, having to
Mhm.
train for enrichment. Um,
Yeah, as far as what? Foraging, different things in their enclosure, introduction to training,
yeah,
introduction to recall. Um, and I think that's why I put that photo in of Sam, the blue-fronted Amazon I had that had no eyes. That was a bird that we adopted. We found out that he was 38 years old when I adopted him. So he had no eyes, so he couldn't see. And I was told that he wasn't let out of his cage. And it's one of the first things I did when I brought him to the center. I just opened up that front of the cage, and I was like, he's not going to fly because he can't see where he's going, so I don't want to push him to that point.
mhm,
Um, but we started slowly shaping, moving things around in his
mhm,
cage. So many times I hear people say I mean, I'm going to say this: adaptation is an amazing thing. Don't limit your bird because you don't think they can do it. Sam was a
mhm,
rock star. Here he is with a toy that because he couldn't see, we put bell on it so he could hear it ring. And not only for him, but so I could tell when I was in the other room, Sam's foraging. Um, but he was a rock star at foraging for food, and I don't know if he had done it before. He didn't act like it. He knew exactly where his food dish was, and we did leave that in place
right,
to make sure but we started taking different foods, putting him in foraging toys. And
mhm.
what I would pay attention to is when I would walk in the morning, I would look down at the bottom of his enclosure to see how much damage he has done since the last time I saw him. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think and Steve brings up a good point. He says impaired animals don't believe they have the same limitations that their human counterparts impart upon them, and I think that's very true. And not just impaired animals. I think a lot of times we place limitations that may not be there, and we kind of need to let our animals do their thing and see, what can they do. I mean, you've worked with a lot of animals with different disabilities and abilities, and I can tell you, I was at a facility that had a senior Amazon, and that it hadn't been outside, it had been inside the facility, and because it couldn't go out in the flight with the rest of the Amazons. And so I said, "Let's push the cage outside." So we took her cage. She was in a regular, size Amazon cage, and we pushed it out into the outdoor aviary with the rest of the Amazons. And you could see her. She just kind of, okay, and she, leaned for and the sun, and there was sun out there was wind, and was she ever gonna be out in that aviary just flying around like everybody else? No, she wasn't. But she needed to, we had to do it slowly. It wasn't like, "We're gonna take your cage outside and you're gonna experience all this brand new stuff." It was,
Right.
"Okay, we'll be out a little bit. We'll put you out for a little while. We'll put you out for, 20 minutes," whatever it was. But it's a matter of giving them that opportunity. And if you're paying attention to your animal's body language, what they're telling you, what they're communicating to you, then you're going to see what works and what doesn't. And where does that level of comfort, if you will, come in? And how do you train past that? Or do you say, okay, that's where we kind of stop that experience? I mean, what do you think?
I'm always about shaping more enrichment, more curiosity, more complexities through
Mhm,
whether you're training or um, take the animal to the next level because I mean, predictability has its place, but
mhm,
also with predictability comes boredom, so keep things changing. How do you keep things changing? Um, what can we do from here? You know, how
mhm.
do we go to the next level with this? I have never
Yeah.
reached the absolute top level with an animal with enrichment where I just stop.
Well, I mean, honestly, if you look at the definition of enrichment, it's about enhancing quality of life, right? And it's a matter of how does that ever possibly end? It doesn't. I mean, that's like saying, okay, I'm going to give you all these really cool things and I'm going to put you in a room or in a house for that matter. Here's all your cool stuff, but you can't get any more stuff and you can't go out. Okay, so for a while, yeah, it'd be cool. You could investigate and explore and whatever, but eventually you hit that point where it's not enough. And I think that's kind of the philosophy we need to have with enrichment is it's not enough. And that doesn't mean 72 toys in the cage, because that's just scary. I've seen it done. But it's what's the next
Mhm.
step? Always kind of looking, what do we do next? What's the next thing?
Well, and if we're talking about parrots, they can live as long as we can, and our tastes change. I mean, I'm not moving the same way I was 30 years ago, you know? So my definition of enrichment, maybe I'm not gonna go on that hike. Um, you know,
More s
I'd like
more
to,
sleep is
but it's
definitely enriching.
right. Right. So as we age, our tastes change, our activities change, the type of people that we interact with change.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning and go to the clubs anymore. I've been there. I've done that. I've moved on.
I don't know, I think Steve just called you out. He said, "I know your definition, 18-year-old single malt." Just
Oh, so he does know me. Oh, I know Steve.
Yeah, there you go.
I just
Um,
realized, oh, that's Steve. Yeah, he does know me.
but see,
Okay, but
it's
the single
probably
malt in my
not
house in a club.
exactly. The delivery of your enrichment has changed, and I think that's something
Correct.
to consider too. So when you start working with a bird and that hasn't had a lot of enrichment, or an animal for that matter, not just a bird, that hasn't had a lot of enrichment, what techniques do you use, to kinda get them accepting of what you're offering?
Great question. And Robin, can I say something before that? Because I
Sure.
always get asked, and I'm sure you do too, what is the hardest animal you've ever trained? And I everybody expects me to say the biggest one. And I'll say, well, I thrive on challenges. That's a reinforcer for me. But if you're talking about length of time, it's the animal that was raised in an unenriched environment and trying that doesn't mean it can't be done. Just you
Right,
got to break it down to smaller pieces and shape it. So with if I'm working with an animal, is this your question that is comes from a lack of enrichment, a history of lack of enrichment? Well,
right,
what I'll do is watch what does it do. Um, a lot of times, I mean, ugh, do we really want to go here? What a bird looks like that comes from an unenriched environment. It can be numerous things, but the
mhm,
one that to me that is the scariest or the sad is the bird that just sits there and just perches, and
yeah,
doesn't interact and engage with his environment. So usually, I mean, food is always a great place to start because they're alive, so it means they're eating. So that's one behavior they're doing. Then you can just get real specific. What are they eating? What are they eating
mhm,
first? What are they eating second? What else do they do? You know? Um, then I'll start from there. I'll start
yeah,
finding out what they're eating first, second, third. And
mhm,
sometimes you're working with an animal who will not take food from you, you know? Um, or if it's a bird, flails its side to the other side of the enclosure to get as far away from you as possible. So I always tell people, you know, what are the bird's reinforcers? What are the reinforcers for it coming near you or flailing itself against the furthest part of the
mhm,
enclosure? Well, then stop doing that.
yeah,
And then just deliver the food reinforcer in a cup if you can and walk away. Because a lot of times people want to stay there. And if the animal's fearful, you're positively punishing the very behavior you're trying to train.
right. And, I think sometimes, positively punishing is a term that people go, "Oh, it's punishment." Or when you say negative reinforcement, people get, "Oh, that's horrible." I can tell you, I have a cat that was formerly feral, and she ended up in our house because there was a medical emergency, and the vet told me I could euthanize this feral cat, and I was like, "No, no, 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 that's not gonna happen." And I will walk up to her and I'll, put my head down if she's on the bed or something, and I'm like, "Hey," and, she has learned, and it's negative reinforcement. If I just put my head down, she'll put her nose up, and as soon as she does that, I leave. I'm like, "Okay, thanks, have a good day," and it's a matter of she'll interact with me, and but it's taken so long. It took me a while to figure it out too, that, I'd say, "Oh, good girl," but I'd stay right there, and then I'm like, "That's not what's reinforcing for her." That's, the interaction is enriching, but I took it a step too far, and I had to take a look at it and back it off again, and so it's negative reinforcement, but it's not a bad thing.
Yeah. And also another thing you said you took it a bit too far. Who doesn't? I mean,
Right.
we all learn from our mistakes.
Yeah.
I admit I make mistakes probably on a daily basis. I just make sure noted, you know,
Yeah.
be careful with
Yeah.
this one. But a lot of times you don't know you make a mistake until you've done it.
It's true, and I think the other thing is, it's all about observation. Like, we keep coming back to there, that it's about paying attention to yourself. I think videotaping yourself when you're doing training, if you can do it unobtrusively, that's the way to do it, because there's so much that you see that you go, "Oh, I can't believe I did
Yeah.
that." Oh,
Yep.
and being aware of it, it's so important.
Yeah. Yep.
I
I
agree.
used to do well, I do it. I still do what do I say I used to do it? I still do it all the time. When I get ready to train something, An animal, I'm like, I don't know if this is going to benefit anything, but I want it recorded in case there's a great moment that happened or there's a big mistake. I'm going to show people. I know it's coming now that I'm rewatching it. You know what I mean? But I
Well, and
didn't know this was going to be a problem when I
and
started.
I think it's important that everybody out there realizes that even when this is what you're doing for a living, you still make mistakes. I mean, I remember there was a paper years ago at IAATE that was about, um, like, all the mistakes that this one guy made over the years, and he was willing to own them all. He was willing to, go through why this happened, what this is it wasn't excuses, it was just a matter of you need to learn from those they're not always mistakes. Sometimes they're just learning opportunities.
Yes.
Did did you like that positive spin on mistakes?
That was a learning moment, AKA
Yeah, there we go.
mistake.
Yeah, okay. We're gonna call them that from now that's the new politically correct term for mistake is, learning opportunity. But I think, when we're doing this training and we want I think we get excited about, "I'm gonna provide all this enrichment. I'm gonna enrich this animal's life. I'm gonna make it so much better, and I'm gonna give him this and give him that and do this and do that." And we don't always think about what are we trying besides providing enrichment, what are we trying to do? Are we, you know, are we trying to introduce something new and see if and teach them, train them to accept new things? Are we do we have a goal for that? I think that's uh, I mean, when you do new enrichment, do you make it goal based?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Is
Um,
that wrong?
no, I think that's important. Because I feel like, you know, you go into a pet store or a bird store, an avian specialty shop, and there's, walls and walls and walls of toys. And I think you've got before you just grab the coolest looking one, I hope people will think, what behavior am I going to elicit with this? What am I looking to elicit? How can I use this other than just hang it in the cage? I mean, that's what I would hope people think of when they're trying to buy new toys, which is not the only kind of enrichment there is, obviously. Um, but I would hope that, and if it's something brand new, how am I going to train my animal that this is something that they want to interact with? So,
Yeah, and like when I provide a piece of enrichment in the form of a toy to a bird, I like a lot of variety on it because I want to see, okay, what part of that toy is that bird interacting with? And
mhm,
I know I want that toy destroyed. That's what I want to see. But what wasn't destroyed? And
mhm,
why is what wasn't destroyed important? Why is it important? And do we need to shape getting to destroying the rest of that part of that toy?
right.
Because I've
So,
seen go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I've seen people be like, "Oh, my bird loves wood," so that's all they ever provide it. And I'm like, "Wow, you missed that opportunity for all the other fun stuff," you know?
Yeah, and so so when you're working with a bird or an animal and you want you want to introduce something new. You and I were talk we talked or we went back and forth briefly about desensitization. Which was a big deal. Everybody's like, "Oh, you got to desensitize. You got to hang it across the room. You got to move it closer, and then you put it in the cage." Um, I feel like we've kind of gotten away from that. So, what are your thoughts about that?
That's a loaded question. Um,
Ooh.
um, well, one of the first things am careful not to do is punish curiosity.
Mhm.
If the animal is looking at something and you'll see it like turning its head, but then if that object moves Oh, some people will go, "Oh, you like this?" And they'll "Bink," and then boom, bird's gone.
Yeah,
What I really observe curiosity, and when I see an animal have curiosity, I was like, "We've got a curious animal. The sky's the limit. Let's make sure we don't punish this."
right.
Um, I'll take a hold of the object, make sure that watch what the animal does because I've learned this too, what the animal does with the object once a human touches it. You know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
that's totally different behavior. First behavior
Right.
was the item was just sitting there. Now the item's sitting there, but I'm touching it. Is the animal okay with that? And then
Mhm.
I'll start moving it around. I'm just taking one example at
Yeah,
that distance and see how the animal reacts. And if it acts excited, I might bring it closer. If it like stiffens up, I might take it back, okay, and say, how can I get this closer for the bird or whatever animal to start interacting
mhm,
with it?
mhm.
And just shape that animal's comfort level with as that novel stimulus gets closer.
Absolutely, and I think, so I think sometimes that you mentioned it right there, it becomes there are times when that turns into flooding. That, "Here you go. No, I'm gonna put it in the cage for you. I'm gonna give this to you, and you're gonna love it. It's gonna be great."
You'll
And
right, you'll be fine.
yeah, "Suck it up, cupcake. It's just a toy." Um, but I never said that, those of you out there that and then Robin said, no, I think it's really about you again, I'm back to observation and that, a look I've worked with animals before where just a look gets a food reinforcer. You bridge it and, "Oh, good. Oh," and then there's that reinforcer for that. And it's not necessarily bringing it closer. It's, "Okay, I've moved it this much closer. I've moved it this much closer." And they're still okay with that. And you've gotta see where that break point is. You've got to see where it's not because if you go past that point, then you need to kinda make it up. You need to kind of backtrack and make things okay again. So
Yep, and you know what, Robin? Just listening to you say this, you'll understand what fear looks like with your animal by training it.
yeah, it's true. It's
Yeah.
very true.
So you'll be able to
Um,
quickly identify, "Whoa, this animal's not comfortable with this.
mhm,
Why and how are we gonna get there?"
yeah, yeah, and I think, you know, we there's a lot of there's so much more that we could talk about. We had talked a little bit about capturing enrichment behaviors. If you see things, an animal and interacting with something and it's enriching, how do you first of all, how do you capture that? And then if you I feel like we need to talk about free play too, where it's like you said in the aviary, there's the sun, there's the hawk flying over, there's all, whatever's in that aviary. And allowing free play to happen because we can't always
So,
be
free
go ahead.
play, I just wanna make sure I understand what you're saying. Free play is just the animal interacting by itself with us observing at a distance where the animal doesn't know we're there?
Right,
Or just
right.
okay.
Because I feel like that's a way to kind of see, you know, what works, what doesn't work, and I mean, you and I both know that most animals are going to behave differently, when they're being watched versus when they're just kind of at will.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Anybody who's ever tried to get a video of an animal playing, knows that's the case.
Yeah, and a great way to observe, and everybody thinks I'm the world's largest voyeur right now, is cameras. I've
Yeah,
got them on my phone, I've got 5 different cameras, I'm like, "What's Rico doing?" "Oh, good boy."
yeah. And it's so easy to do now. It's not, you don't need the giant monitor and all that kinda stuff to do it anymore. It's right there on your phone, and it's so much easier. But, so okay, we're at 8 o'clock. I can't believe we're at 8 o'clock at this point. But, so you need to come
Time.
back. We need to do this again. Um, but is there anything you would like to tell everybody that's listening about so what's your tip for training either for enrichment or as enrichment? What do you want them to take away from tonight?
Oh, you didn't tell me you were gonna ask me this, Robin.
I didn't I
Did you?
well, I won't put you on the spot like that. I think, so
Well,
what I do
I
need
can
to
say
do
something
go
I can
ahead.
say something real fast that you can do through enrichment and you can do through training, and it will benefit your animal, is keep your animal used to change, and you can shape that. There you go.
That's I love that you said that, and that's a whole nother discussion because I am a big proponent of change with our animals because I think a lot of times we kind of mess things up when we do this really rigid, harsh routine. So yeah, that's really important. Carmen asked recommendations of cameras that you can see on your iPhone.
Mm. I have I use Wyze, W-Y-Z-E. I have
That's
5
what Steve
different
recommended.
cameras on my center right now. I love them.
Yeah,
You can talk to them
okay,
if you want to, which I recommend. It doesn't really work in my favor, so I don't. But you can hear them, you can see them, you can pan, tilt, turn around. Great night vision.
okay. Good to know. All right, so I'm gonna get you to promise that you'll come back another Friday night.
Absolutely. And don't we have a date here in the next
We
month?
do have a date, and I don't have that written down, and aren't I awful? It's next month I'm gonna do
That's okay.
coffee with Lara, so pay attention. You have to listen to every single one. I listened to the dinosaur one the other day. Oh, it was so
Yeah.
cool. It was fun. Um, but so I'll be doing a coffee with the critters, with Lara in March, and maybe we can get together another date for a Friday night flock talk. And if people have questions or things that they would like us to kind of discuss, um, definitely throw them out there because obviously I hope you guys have seen from tonight that we do have this passion and we're more than happy to talk about it and could probably go on and on. But no, thank you to everybody who's been listening and for your comments. And I haven't been able to keep up with all the comments, but thank you. And thanks, Lara. Um, Next week, just so you guys know, um, a reminder that the sale's going on till Sunday. And then next week, I'm going to be talking about defining enrichment. Um, there's a lot of different definitions that are out there, and I wanted to kind of touch on that because we've had some. There's been some controversy with what is the definition of enrichment. We've got the USDA regs coming out. They're definitions that are different for different people. And so it's about really different things to different birds. So that's what I'm going to be talking about next week. Again, Lara, thank you. And we'll be talking, but I will see you guys on Coffee with the Critters in March.
Yes, and thank you for having me on, Robin. It's good seeing you again. Good being
Yeah.
in touch. And yeah, I look forward to having you on Coffee with the Critters.
All right. We'll see you guys later. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye bye.